So I'm going to tie another small nymph. This could also be classified as a soft hackle. This is a Turkey Biot BWO nymph or soft hackle. It has three components to it. It's got a turkey biot for the body, a dubbed abdomen, and then I should say thorax, and then a Hungarian Partridge hackle. The biots, if you haven't used those in nymphs or dry flies, they're rather interesting in terms of the different ways that you can use them and the effects that you get out of those. That is the Turkey Biot BWO. Quick little fly, and I'll get started tying. I shall begin the Biot blue-winged olive soft hackle by placing my hook in the vise. This is a Mustad 94859. It's a 2x long dry fly hook. I prefer this hook because it's a little bit lighter wire, as well as I like the longer hook shank. It just gives me a little bit longer body on the fly. After debarbing the hook, I'll attach my thread. I'm using a Uni 8.0 in black. I've already waxed the thread. I'll attach my thread about an eye length behind the eye of the hook and wrap down the hook shank, just putting a nice base layer of thread along the hook shank. You don't necessarily have to do this, but as you'll see in just a moment, when I apply the biot, the thread's going to help to reinforce that biot. Now, the first material that we're going to tie in is the actual biot, and a lot of people don't know what a biot is, but simply it is a specialized barb that is on a flight feather. This is a goose flight feather here, but turkeys have them, ducks have them, and so on. It is a specialized barb that is along the leading edge of the flight feather that helps in their flight. But what it is it's just a short little triangular looking barb that can be used for making nymphs and even in some dry flies. Now, the turkey biot that we're going to use, the reason that we're using the turkey is it's a little bit longer. We're going to actually attach this to the hook shank and then wrap it around. Before I attach that to the hook shank, though, a couple things I want to point out. We want to make certain that when we attach this to the hook shank, that we put it in the right way. If you were to actually magnify the underside of, is that the right one? The underside of that biot, what you would see is it's kind of cup-shaped. And this edge right over here would be on the left side where you're viewing is a darker edge, and there's actually a little bit of a ridge right there. We're going to use that to add some segmentation to our fly. Now, I point that out because there are ways of tying these in. If you tie this in wrong and wrap it in, that ridge gets suppressed. But if you tie it incorrect, it does not. The correct way is this: when you peel this off, you get this little notch right here. I'll show you. A lot of people will take their barbs like this and reach in and cut those out. If you do that and you're not experienced with them, you're not going to get this little notch on here. But if you take the barb, the biot, and actually just peel it off like this, you get this little notch that shows up on one side. That is important simply because, again, until you're familiar with these, it helps you as a marker in terms of how to tie this on. And how we're going to tie this on is we want that, as we go to tie this on, we want that notch facing down. So right here, I have the notch facing down, and I'm going to bring this back, and I'm going to tie in the tip of this. That way, when I start to apply this, it will flip over and that notch will actually be facing forward. And what that does is this dark ridge right here will be on the trailing edge of all of my wraps. One thing before I actually wrap this in, I want to point out to you, these little tidbits that I throw out in these videos, a lot of these I've learned from other people or I've learned on my own. However, there is a reference that you can get, which I can't recommend highly enough, that actually is where I learned this about these biots years ago when I started messing with them in my fly tying. 1998, Jim Scholmeyer and Ted Leeson. Yeah, I got those names right. They published a book called The Fly Tyer's Benchside Reference. There will be a link down in the description down below to it. It is a thick book that is basically a compendium of all kinds of fly tying techniques, all different materials that are used in fly tying and how to use them, how to tie them in. And in that book has this information about turkey biots or even goose biots. The book won't teach you one single fly, but it will have all the techniques that are used in almost any and every fly tying in terms of different materials to get different results. So I point that out simply because if you're a tyer who wants to really learn all these techniques and everything, it's a great book to have. The other thing that it points out is this particular turkey biot is dyed in a Baetis green. It's kind of a medium olive color. The dyeing process strips these of any oils and it dries them out. You can tie this in and then start to wrap it, but often right as you flip it over and tie it in, it's going to crack and break right there. So as I am tying these, I like to moisten the tip of this, and I just run this in my mouth or get a little moisture on your fingers. You can have a dish of water next to you, whatever. It just gets a little bit of moisture in there, and it helps it to keep from cracking and breaking so easily. We're going to do that. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place some head cement along the hook shank here. And actually, I should put that on after I tie that in. So let me tie this in. And I'm tying just the tip of this in. I don't need much. And the reason is that that will maximize the biot for actually making the body. I'm going to wrap my thread forward, touching turns so I have a nice, even, smooth underbody. And I am going to bring my thread all the way up towards the eye right here. Now, once I have that tied in, as I said, I'm going to put some head cement on here. You could use some Zap-A-Gap if you want, some CA glue. I just take, this is a fly type that I use as a regular standard head cement. All this is going to do when I wrap this in is it's going to help bond that biot to the thread, the underbody thread, a little bit, and it's just going to help protect it in fishing. With that tied in, I'm going to take my hackle pliers, grabbing the end of that biot. In this case, I'm going to use the rotary features on my vise to start to wrap that in. Now notice that back edge, that ridge that I mentioned, it's the darker portion of the biot is just lifting out and creating a nice segmented edge. Pulling a little too hard on my hackle pliers. The nice thing is with the head cement on there, that didn't all unravel. You'll also notice that as that biot gets tied in further and further, the ridge right there gets a little, the spacing gets a little wider between each wrap, so it gives you a nice representation of a segmented insect or something. That's part of the reason the biots are used. So trim away the excess. That's actually the most involved part of this fly. The next part is to put on a small abdomen or body. I'm using some life cycle dubbing, and this is a caddis life cycle dubbing, and I'm using just a gray. It's kind of a light gray. You could use muskrat if you want. You could use something a little darker, even an olive if you want on something like this. I'm going to make about a 2.5 inch sparse dubbing noodle. Because all I'm doing here is wrapping this in as just a little ball. I want to leave at least a couple of eye widths behind the eye of the hook for my hackle. But here I'm just putting in a little ball. You could even use just plain old rabbit if you wanted to on that. For the hackle, I'm using some Hungarian Partridge. This is actually some of the darker Hungarian Partridge on a skin. You could use the lighter if you want. I prefer the darker with contrasting with that gray a little bit. After I select a feather, I'm going to peel off the fluff from that. Using my hackle pliers, I will grab the tip of that. Holding that, I will then stroke the barbs rearward, isolating the tip of it. Just trim off so I have just a little triangle. That gives me an anchor to tie that in. And I'll leave my thread right back up against the dubbing. Taking my hackle pliers, I'll stroke those barbs rearward. You're only going to get 2 wraps of this in. There's more feather. You could get 3 wraps if you wanted, but you want to keep it relatively sparse. There's 1 wrap. And now we've got 2 wraps in. Trim away the excess hackle. Sweeping those hackle barbs back, I'll create the head of the fly. And then I'll put a 4 or 5 turn whip finish in. A little bit of head cement here, and our biot soft hackle is all done. So as I said, it's a fairly simple, straightforward fly. Once you get the hang of using the biots, it really is not a difficult fly. Just keep in mind, again, if you're using the dyed biots, even if you're using naturals, I find that sometimes they just get dried out a little bit. You want to moisten those before you try to wrap those in. That is the Turkey Biot BWO soft hackle. Great little nymph if you like fishing nymphs for trout as well as a soft hackle. Thanks for watching today. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.